Hello and welcome back to Downtime Activities, and welcome back to our video series that doesn't really have a name. It's our kind of discussion video series where Will and I have conversations about RPG or storytelling related stuff, and it's a little too short of a discussion for our full-length bonus action podcast, but a little less researched and studied than our help action series of videos. It's something in between. We'll come up with a name for it eventually. Today we're talking about something a bit different, a bit weird, and that is whimsy in RPGs. What do we mean when we say whimsy? What does whimsy mean to you?
Well, so the definition of whimsy is playfully quaint or fanciful behavior or humor. And I think, like, for the most part, I mean, most tabletop RPG campaigns are going to be a combination of sort of serious and whimsy. Some RPGs systems in particular are going to lean more one way or the other. Dread is not really a RPG system that, bleeds into whimsy for the most part. But there are RPG systems out there that are built entirely off of it. And when I think of whimsy in like fantasy worlds or in tabletop RPG worlds and stuff like that, I'm thinking more of like Wizard of Oz. The Harry Potter world has a lot of whimsy in it, kind of everywhere. Compared to like the Lord of the Rings, which like has a little bit of whimsy in it, in kind of the guise of the hobbits.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, it's much grittier. It's much more grounded. It's got this much longer, deeper, darker history to it, and that's comes across in the storytelling. And tabletop RPGs that are leaning one way or the other will be kind of the same way.
But Will, I'm running a game and I want a serious story. I want a story that is meaningful and impactful. I can't have whimsy in my game, right? That'll make it goofy and silly, and it'll detract away from the serious story that I want to tell. Or will it?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, into video.
My first piece of advice is if you want to avoid whimsy in your game is to not have any player characters. That will cut out probably any and all whimsy, and the risk of any whimsy being involved. I mean, obviously, especially if you look at like Harry Potter and Wizard of Oz as well to some degrees, like whimsy can absolutely exist alongside like impactful stories and serious stories. It's just a little bit harder to do. The balance is a little bit harder to find. But part of what it does, and we've talked about this with humor in games before, is it just makes those serious blows land a little harder.
Absolutely.
Quite often, if done right. Because it's this sort of serious depth of storytelling alongside this kind of whimsical world, and that just the jarring nature of that tends to mean that you not only still get that effect, but you tend to get it to better effect, I think.
Yeah, I think I was obviously asking that question as a little bit of a seeding for a conversation.
Right.
Whimsy does not mean that a story will not be serious anymore, right? You can still tell, like with your kind of popular media examples, you can tell a very serious, at times dark and gritty story with a quite whimsical backdrop to it. Like you said, a very whimsical story kind of sets up harder hitting dark moments because there will be such a juxtaposition from the rest of what you're interacting with, or kind of what the status quo is around you. If everything has these kind of goofy names and these sort of whimsical kind of weird characters and creatures around, when an evil thing happens or a very dark twisted thing happens in that world, it'll be set apart even more so, which will make that be very kind of stand out. That being said, the kind of baseline of the game will still be a lot less serious, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of different mindsets when playing these games, and if you're going for a super gritty world and a super gritty feel, I would shy away from whimsy, obviously. But you can, as we were talking about here, still tell a very impactful story with a whimsical sort of backdrop and set dressing to it. It'll just make for a kind of more lighthearted, goofy feel for a majority of the time. And that can be very fun.
Yeah,
It can be something that's
you know,
different.
and the prep work that goes into these types of campaigns are very different as well. Grittier campaigns, by and large, require a lot more prep work.
Hmm.
And like it require a lot more backstory to the world. It requires a lot more backstory to the characters. Like it requires more complex relationships. Like one of the big things that a sort of whimsical world has going for it, just kind of cutting the reins loose and letting the campaign run where it will, is it's the big it's kind of a whole campaign built off that premise of like be careful what jokes you make at the table because the DM might then just make it canon in the
Every
campaign.
good joke canon will be used against you.
That's whimsy campaigns in a nutshell to me.
Hmm.
The players are constantly speaking things into canon, and the DM is relying on that, and probably by and large, just running the campaign without all that much prep, and just letting the player characters kind of steer chunks of the story.
Hmm.
Um, if you have a hard time letting player characters control the story or mess with your quests or solve problems in unrealistic ways,
Whimsical ways, one might say.
whimsical campaigns are probably not for you.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
because
that
that's kind of the whole point of it all is that you're just cutting it loose and you're letting it run and letting the players have a lot of control over it.
I think that's a good disclaimer to this. A lot of the times with a more whimsical sort of story being told, it will require you to be able to think on your feet more. You
Mm-hmm.
To be a good DM, you have to think on your feet all the time, anyways. Like that's a big part of DMing at a high level, I guess you could say. Um, but with a more whimsical, kind of goofy set dressing to your campaign and the kind of stories that tend to be told in that, it will require a little less planning, probably, but a little more of that reactivity and ability
Mm-hmm.
to kind of go with the flow, kind of lean into whatever the characters kind of stir up and go from there.
Well, and stat blocks aren't going to matter quite as much. Um, the rules aren't going to matter quite as much.
Problem solving is going to be very different on average. It's going to be a lot less. I mean, there will still certainly be combat and those sorts of things, but
Mm-hmm.
a far more whimsical campaign will have far more whimsical problem solving. Not everything will be open fights. There will be a lot more kind of goofy ideas to try and make an encounter go in the favor of the players, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
lean into that and sort of accept and roll with the whimsy of that will be what makes it fun and different than your kind of normal, more gritty world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is all very different, but can be very fun and good. How do you go about implementing it? I think that we've talked for a little while here. There's kind of it's two, obviously double-edged sword. There's good and bad to it. There's comparison in kind of what the story you're wanting to tell is. Let's say someone really wants to run a whimsical world, thinks that'd be really fun. They've been doing a lot of gritty, dark fantasy for a while, and they want to mix it up. What are some ways you would go about shoving a bunch of whimsy into your story?
Well, first things first. I think our audience is probably sick of hearing us say this, but sit down and talk with your players. Uh, Make sure everybody kind of knows what the brief is, knows what the plan is. Because if everybody's kind of cut loose to make goofier characters, they're going to take advantage of that. There was an RPG system that I heard about a while back. I really wish I could remember the name of it, but part of the point of its character creation is you can play literally anything or anybody you want. Like they even mention in the rule set that it's like it's supposed to be a very whimsical world and whimsical storytelling, but it's like if you want to play a talking dog, that's totally fine.
Go
If you
for it.
want to play a if you want to play a tree, that's fine. It's like your DM just has to figure out how to build the campaign around that. But like immediately it's just like, oh, they mentioned somewhere in the rule thing about like talking rats in their world. And it's like that makes me want to make this like rat duelist who's like using like a toy soldier's sword and he's trying to become like, the rat king of the whole city or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's like that's a whimsical weird character. And that's not a character you get to play in any other format, in any other tabletop RPG. So when you're building a like whimsical world intentionally and your players are aware of that, they're going to make characters that fit the world a little better. They're going to make characters that are a little goofy, that are a little sort of off center in one direction or another. And then once again, rely on the players heavily as you're going forward. Make sure your NPCs are suitably ridiculous. Make sure the problems the characters are solving are ridiculous. Allow ridiculous solutions to work.
Mm-hmm.
Let characters crit impossible checks to do something utterly
Seduce the
ludicrous,
dragon, right?
Right. Well, and even like just super ridiculous stuff where it's like, okay, we've got a large cauldron, we've got a pile of scrap timber, and we've got a few other knickknacks. I attempt to build a mech, and it's just like, and it's like, well, he crit the check, so I guess he's managed to build a mech.
He has a cauldron mech now.
And that's like, in your regular 1 to 20 epic fantasy D&D world, there's no way your DM's ever going to allow that.
No.
And
not unless you're an artificer and you have a lot of, you put the pieces into place, you take the time to get the components, whatever.
It's more than just a cauldron, some scrap lumber, and some knickknacks that go into the project. But you just kind of be hand wavy about that type of stuff. You let it go. And I think this type of campaign, the longer it goes on, the longer players are able to get away with the ridiculous problem solving, and the more, by the DM feeding off of that and introducing ridiculous problems, this thing tends to self-perpetuate. So like once you get past the first couple sessions of everybody being whimsical and ridiculous, it's going to just start feeding itself at that point.
Absolutely. It'll kind of be that snowball effect as the whimsy builds and people get used to, oh, he's not saying no when I make a joke solution to what our problem is. The DM's just like, yeah, sure, roll with it. Okay, let's do more of that. That's fun.
And then the whimsy snowball catches up everyone and everything in its path.
Absolutely.
And,
becomes a whimsy avalanche.
Yeah. That's the goal.
That's the hope. I think another really useful tool when kind of planning a whimsical campaign is to, whether it's directly kind of robbed off of another IP or it's your own sort of base idea, have a very clear brand of whimsy that you're going for and establish that at the beginning. Because there's very different types of whimsy. Your whimsical world could be something very Harry Potter-esque, which is still a fairly not necessarily realistic, but it has a little more of a darker tone to it at times, but has a lot of these, kind of weird names and sort of whimsical characters and whimsical problem solving and weird magic and stuff. But if you
goblin language is called
gobbledygook and Hogsmeade and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, like kind of that sort of whimsy. And then there's like Alice in Wonderland whimsy, which is an entire other brand of whimsy in an entire other world. You could absolutely run a similar sort of whimsical story in a place like that. You just have to establish that so that your players know what kind of characters will get the most out of that world and can really feed into it. Because I think like all of a sudden you make an Alice in Wonderland-esque world. You have a character who's a Mad Hatter-esque, like chaos sorcerer if it's D&D rules, and then you have like whatever the rabbit folk are called. You make one of those, then you like people can kind of lean into some tropey stuff from that sort of a world and make this very whimsical adventure together. So I think establish your whimsy, establish what the whimsical brand is, and then like you were saying, that sort of snowball effect will start as your players see goofy and whimsical things pay off. They'll lean into it more and more and more, and it'll make for a very fun and different story. And I don't think it's the kind of game, unless you're a very specific play group, I don't think it's the kind of game you run consistently. I think it's a palate cleanser. I think it's a, you just got done with your like 1 to 20 or your whatever, your like long running sort of like against a mighty lich or an army of undead or a dragon invasion or whatever, like you're kind of real facing Vlaakith, right? The kind of real D&D kind of gritty campaign, and everybody's like, that was awesome, I want something different. Throw out a whimsical story, even if it's not a super long campaign, doing like a sort of, mini arc adventure series campaign that's very whimsical and goofy will be a super fun palate cleanser and a different way to play.
Well, and that can help focus it as well.
Mhm.
For example, we have a Savage Worlds series on the channel, which we intended to do another like episode of this year and just never got around to. Um,
Oh
between
yeah.
a bunch of brutal scheduling with our Aussie's Mysteries,
Yeah.
which is like a very hardcore intentional Scooby Doo knockoff. The idea to run a Halloween short campaign. I think it's 3 episodes.
I think so, yeah.
Where you guys are a group of teenage super sleuths.
Isn't it
Being
Sleuth
chased around a
LLC, I
mansion.
believe, is the company.
It is being chased around a mansion by a ghost.
Uh-huh.
And intentionally, I've never gotten to watch a whole season of Scooby Doo as research for a campaign before, but it was kind of nice.
Yeah.
But it's a particular brand of goofy and kind of whimsical that you're aiming for with, and knowing from the ground up that like, physics may not matter all that much. Realism.
Logic doesn't really matter all that much.
It's because there's a feel you're going for, and when everybody's a part of that project and is aiming for that feel, it's absolutely a great palate cleanser, and it works great as a short little campaign.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with like that really shows the rules we've talked about here in designing a whimsical game in action. Like you set a whimsical theme, a very clear one to follow, and we all made very unique and different sorts of characters that absolutely hit the nail on the head with that kind of a story. Right. And then there was decisions made that were like, non-optimal RPG decisions that just like felt like an episode of Scooby-Doo. So of course we're going to do that.
Well, and it's the same thing with knowing that like, and this is I think a big piece of advice in general is like, I can't punish the players in the same way I would in a traditional campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be the case, I think, with whimsy in general. Like, and it's another one of those things that just feeds that whimsy snowball and turns it into an avalanche. Is once the players realize that a lot of their bad decisions don't have all that bad of repercussions, or at least maybe they have bad repercussions, but not deadly repercussions like they would in a lot of other tabletop RPGs, they'll feel free to lean into that whimsy and that ridiculous problem solving a little bit more.
It'll feel a little bit safer to try and approach the world in that way.
And really, whimsical worlds should feel safer.
They should,
for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the core of the world that you're running, it should be kind of safer.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably about a good place to stop talking about this. I think that, just like we said, it's very different. You should be intentional with how you run it and how you plan for it and how you make characters for it. And you have to kind of be bought in and really lean into it to get the most out of it. But a whimsical story is a very fun, different style of game to play. I don't think for us as a group, it's at all the kind of consistent thing we would want to do, but we absolutely love it as the kind of in between other things thing to run. It makes for a, like we were saying, a great palate cleanser and a fun different way to play. And I think it also sharpens your creative problem solving abilities as players, because all of a sudden you're free to think goofy and problem solve creatively, and it gives you a safe space to do that. And then when you go into your next kind of more gritty story, it may not be as whimsical and goofy, but you're like, well, there's more than one way to do this. Let's think of a kind of weird outside approach to solve this problem. You've kind of flexed those muscles a little bit beforehand and learned how to kind of process in that way, I think.
Right. And I think one thing we've all lamented quite a bit with D&D and tabletop RPGs in general, especially as you play them too long, is defaulting into only thinking within the rules.
Yeah.
Whereas like, that's why it's a lot of fun to play with a new player, because it's like for me, it's like I'm playing a barbarian. The optimal decision is hit him with my axe.
Rage, smash.
Right. Whereas like a new player's like, let me look at what's in my inventory. I'm carrying a cauldron. I would like to stick the empty cauldron over the top of his head. It's just like, and then hit it.
Yes. Ring the bell.
It's like that's not in the rules. Like, that's not statistically optimal. And that's how you should be playing D&D by and large. You should be. It's not a like ignore all the rules thing, but like what's nice about tabletop RPGs is they are limited by imagination, not by
rules, not by software.
into it.
Yeah.
So you should think outside of the rules and think outside of what is optimal in order to tell a better story and have more fun. So, and Whimsy absolutely is great for that.
It'll just absolutely kind of get you used to thinking in a way of, instead of thinking about optimal combat decisions, thinking about unique and interesting ways to use the kit available and the situation available to you. Hope you found this useful. Try Whimsy. You try Whimsy today. Whimsy is different, but very, very fun, and is a great option. Another kind of tool in your toolkit of styles of campaign to run. If you have ever run a whimsical game, what was the world like? Was it kind of your own spin, or has anyone run? I'm like, my brain's already going now thinking about like an Alice in Wonderland campaign. I think that would be super fun and twisted. But
and I think
anything
it's an
like that.
Excellent one to really mix in a level of both whimsy and like dark and kind of serious.
It would have those. It would have kind of give you that big punch on the dark, serious moments. But yeah, if you have any interesting sorts of whimsical games you've run, please throw a comment down and talk about them. I'd love to interact with people and hear about those things. Also, if you have any ideas for kind of short discussion stuff, feel free to throw that in the comments too. We have kind of a list of these that we're always adding and then pulling off of as we use, but any other ideas for little short discussions that people would like to hear us and our opinions on, I guess, please throw that down there. We're by no means experts, but we like to talk about this stuff, so give us an excuse to do it more. Now, go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.